Have you ever found yourself explaining the same thing over and over? You explain your intentions. You explain your decisions. You explain why you're hurt. You explain why you're setting a boundary. Yet somehow, the more you explain yourself, the less understood you feel. Most people believe that if they just find the right words, others will finally understand them. But psychology tells us something different. Sometimes people understand exactly what you're saying. They just don't agree with it. And that's where many people become trapped. Today we're going to explore the psychology behind over-explaining, why it destroys your confidence, and how learning to stop explaining yourself can completely change your life. The need to be understood. Imagine a man standing in front of a locked door. Every day he knocks harder, he speaks louder, he explains himself better, but the door never opens. Many people live their entire lives trying to gain validation from people who have already decided how they feel about them. Psychologically, this comes from a deep human need for acceptance. We want to be understood because being understood feels safe. But when we depend on understanding from others, we hand them control over our emotional state. Why people over-explain? People who constantly explain themselves often share one thing in common. They fear being misunderstood. Maybe they grew up being criticized. Maybe they were blamed for things they didn't do. Maybe they spent years defending themselves in toxic relationships. Over time, they learn that every decision requires a defense. Every boundary requires a justification. Every feeling requires evidence. This creates a habit that slowly destroys confidence. The validation trap. The more you explain yourself, the more you subconsciously ask for permission. Think about it. When someone says, "I can't make it," that's a statement. But when someone says, "I can't make it because of this and this and this, and I hope that's okay," now they're seeking approval. Psychologically, over-explaining often reveals insecurity, not because you're weak, but because you're afraid your decision won't be accepted. Some people don't want understanding. This is a difficult truth. Not everyone is trying to understand you. Some people are trying to control you. Some people benefit when you doubt yourself. Some people benefit when you keep defending your boundaries. Because as long as you're explaining yourself, you're still negotiating. And that's exactly where they want you. The power of silence. Silence makes many people uncomfortable. Why? Because silence demonstrates confidence. A confident person doesn't need to convince everyone. They don't need endless arguments. They don't need approval from every person in the room. When someone challenges their decision, they simply say, "This is what I've decided." And they leave it there. The emotional exhaustion of explaining. Imagine carrying a backpack. Every explanation adds another stone. Every argument adds another stone. Every attempt to convince someone adds another stone. Eventually, you're exhausted. Not because life is difficult, but because you're carrying emotional weight that doesn't belong to you. You are not responsible for making everyone understand. Boundaries don't require permission. One of the biggest psychological shifts a person can make is realizing this. Boundaries are not requests. Boundaries are decisions. You don't need a committee meeting to decide what is healthy for your life. You don't need unanimous approval. A boundary can be as simple as no. And no is a complete sentence. When explaining becomes a weapon against you, manipulative people often ask endless questions, not because they're confused, because they're searching for weaknesses. Every explanation gives them another angle to attack, another argument, another way to keep you engaged. The more you explain, the more material they have to use against you. Self-respect changes everything. When you stop explaining yourself, something strange happens. You begin respecting yourself more. You stop chasing validation. You stop begging for understanding. You stop trying to convince people who have already made up their minds. Your confidence grows because your actions begin matching your values. The final lesson. There is a difference between communication and justification. Healthy communication is explaining something once. Justification is explaining it 20 times. If someone genuinely wants to understand you, one honest conversation is enough. If they don't want to understand you, no amount of explanation will ever be enough. The strongest people are not the loudest. They're not the most persuasive. They're the people who know their truth and can stand in it without needing everyone else's approval. The next time you feel the urge to explain yourself for the 10th time, pause. Ask yourself, am I communicating or am I seeking permission? Because the moment you stop explaining yourself to everyone, you begin reclaiming your power. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all.